after your committee's hearing back in September into doping allegations, Miss Radcliffe's name emerged and she said, forced to defend her reputation. I know you have said it wasn't your intention for any names linked to doping allegations to come out, but hers did. Would you like to take this opportunity to apologise to her now?
Well, I think the truth of the matter is, as I said then, that since I wasn't naming Paula, no apology is required. I think it's a terrible shame that her name was linked with the hearing, and I'm amongst millions of people in this country who has nothing but admiration for the sporting achievements linked to her name. So I think that's absolutely fantastic. What I do think is a pity, and what I had not realised at the time, is that Ms Radcliffe had been pursued by people in and outside the sport on this issue beforehand, and I'm afraid that may have been why the link was made, but it had nothing to do with me. And I will tell you one thing, which is that the committee we had was a 3-hour hearing in which we went into all of the different areas of the blood doping initial scandals, including reports about Russia, reports about Kenyan athletics. It would have been quite inappropriate not to raise the question about whether British athletes had been involved in any way, but we did not mention any names. We were careful never to mention any names, and there was no suggestion in anything that I said that Ms Radcliffe was involved, and I'm very sad that it was taken that way.
Well, let's just remind our audience what exactly you did say. Here's the relevant clip.
When you hear that the London Marathon, potentially the winners or medalists of the London Marathon, potentially British athletes, are under suspicion for very high levels of blood doping, when you think of the effect that has on young people who hold that event and the community nature of that event, what are your emotions about that?
I mean, it could only be Paula Radcliffe, potentially the winners or medalists at the London Marathon. Aside from the wheelchair race, it could only have been her.
Well, of course, I don't think that's true, because there are Paralympics and, frankly, from what I knew at the time, there were medalists as well. There was no intention to name Paula Radcliffe there at all. And if you look at the questions, those are not just about the London Radcliffe, they're about the London Marathon. They're about people who are competing in other sports as well, in British athletics. So actually, that's just been built up, and it's a terrible shame that it has been. But as I say, it has nothing to do with what I said or what the committee was working on.
OK, let me bring in Paula Radcliffe. You've heard what Jesse Norman's had to say. It's a shame, it was sad, but no apology is needed. What would you like to say to him?
Well, personally, I do feel that I would appreciate an apology. He may not have intentionally meant to name me, but in fact, if you ask him to name a winner or medalist of the London Marathon, I wouldn't imagine that he could name any of the others in that period, and it shouldn't have come down to that. And I think my question would be, did he have any conflict of interests to declare before that hearing in terms of the newspaper that were pursuing me, harassing me and threatening me, and that he had worked and written with them and then left the hearing arm in arm with those journalists? That would be a huge question for me. But I think first and foremost, for that committee and to chair that committee, to hear accusations made against a sport governing body and not to have any representative of that sport governing body there, nor any expert with a full knowledge of the complicated situation we were discussing, and just to have the one-sided expert who was making that accusation, who actually made quite a number of errors during that hearing, which were not picked up on because they couldn't, because you wouldn't expect the MPs to be able to have the knowledge to understand that those mistakes were being made. And it just smacked to me a little bit of a setup and a little bit of an exercise for the MPs instead of an actual exercise to get to the truth and to try and determine, is the UK huge? Does it have a problem with blood doping in athletics? And I would argue it doesn't. And if you ask Mr. Norman if he is aware of the sport in the UK, which has the highest number of athletes currently serving a doping ban, I would hazard a guess he wouldn't be able to answer that, and he wouldn't be able to say how many athletes are currently from track and field serving a ban.
OK, there's a lot of points there, Paula Radcliffe. Jesse Norman, let's try and go through them. First of all, could you name any other British winners or medalists from the London Marathon over the period from 2001?
The answer is no, not at the moment.
Only Paula Radcliffe.
And I'm not sure there are. Well, that shows my ignorance.
Which is why you
was not
can't be
intending to
surprised
refer
that her
to
name
Paula
emerged
Radcliffe.
after your hearing.
No, because of course, there are Paralympians as well, and this is a matter of joining various dots together. What I would encourage your viewers to do is to spend the time and look online at the hearing, because what they'll see is it was a 3-hour discussion of all these things. Just to pick up on some of the other points that Paula Radcliffe made, we had invited the IAAF from the outset, and Lord Coe specifically, to give testimony to us, and it took some time to arrange that, but there's always been that offer on the table. That particular hearing was on the World Anti-Doping Agency and on UK anti-doping, and that's why we focused on those institutions, as we're focusing today on UK athletics. If you take whether I had any conflict of interest, the answer is emphatically not. Anyone can check my register of interests. There was a public concern raised by reports in the Sunday Times and in other newspapers, which we were under obligation as MPs, as representatives of the people, to investigate. We did investigate them, and we were very clear not to take any evidence or information from the Sunday Times or any other newspaper in terms of blood scores or any of that stuff. We weren't interested in that. We were just trying to get to the real questions, which is what should the international and UK regulatory authorities have been doing, and was there a case for tightening up the law or the rules? And that's the focus we'll continue to have and continue to make.
Do you want to reconsider again? An opportunity to apologise to Paula Radcliffe now?
Well, listen, I'm perfectly happy to say that I'm sorry to hear about what's happened, and I'm sorry that it's been taken in this way. But as I've explained, it really has had nothing to do with what I was saying or what my committee was doing. And I think it's a terrible shame that it's been taken in that way.
Paula Radcliffe.
Yeah, I accept that. And I think that from this point, what I would like to see is everybody move forward in terms of getting to the truth coming out, but also making sure that in all sports, the federations and the integrity and the protection of the clean athletes across all sports moves forward in the right direction. And if you ask me what a government select committee can do in that respect in terms of improving things, I think it's working towards pushing through the legislation so that we can increase the doping bans, we can increase the deterrence, and we can possibly look towards criminalisation of the whole chain, including the entourage, the supply of the doping materials, and the athletes and coaches who take that decision to take that shortcut and to cheat.
How hounded have you felt in the last few months?
I think in the last few months it's improved a little bit. The shock and the toughest time for me, I think, was in that beginning period from July, when the Sunday Times journalists first came to me and refused to give me the opportunity to sit down with the Australian experts and just to reasonably discuss these things, to then hearing about other athletes caught up in it, and having to make the decision on whether or not I would publish my blood data at a time when it wasn't fully understood and explained, and I didn't have the backing and the explanations of the IAAF and the WADA blood experts. So that was the hardest time. I think now it's kind of come through that. I've been probably at one with many in athletics, very, very shocked and angry at the allegations that have come out. But now I really am part of that view that we don't just criticise, we proactively work together and try and find a solution to make improvements within the IAAF and within the sport of athletics to get it back to where it should be, which I feel is a very, very strong sport. It's a sport that I love and a sport that I want to make a better sport for everybody involved in watching and in competing in it in the future.
As you say, you were cleared by the IAAF. They said you were accused of cheating based on gross misinterpretation of raw and incomplete data. Knowing what we now know about the IAAF, do you think some people will still think you cheated? Well,
I think that's the damage that has been done, yes. I know, and that's one of the things that I find hardest to come to terms with, is that something that I've always been so strongly against and spent my whole career within athletics campaigning for better tests, to have been accused of something so abhorrent to me, and to know that out there, no matter what I do now, there will always be some people who unfortunately will believe that. So I do feel that there has been damage done to my reputation. I think that I'm able to stand a lot stronger through that because I know that there's no truth to it, and I know that the people that really matter to me believe that. But still, it's not a nice situation to be in, and I think that there is where the international bodies of WADA and of the IAAF have let me down, because their first responsibility should be to every clean athlete that they keep their sport so that they can compete on a fair and level playing field and see that reflected in their performances, and not be put in the situation to ever have their performances doubted.
The committee hearing today, this is the third one that Jessie Norman's group of MPs are carrying out into these allegations. The witnesses giving evidence today, the boss of UK Athletics, Ed Warner, the chief executive of UK Anti-Doping, Nicole Sapstead. Is it possible that they really could not have known what was going on when it comes to doping at a global level?
Well, I think here's where you've got to be very careful, and you have to understand that a lot of people within athletics had suspicions and knew that there, at some level, was doping going on within athletics. But you cannot ban people based on suspicions and based on allegations. You have to have enough proof. You cannot ever put an innocent athlete in a situation that I've been in, for example.
Sure. But I just wonder if enough questions were being asked by these well-paid administrators.
It's not the paid administrators. It's the way that the whole system has to be set up. So there needs to be a much bigger investment in anti-doping. That whole anti-doping integrity unit has to be separate from the rest of the International Athletics Federation, so that there cannot be a crossover in information that enabled the corruption and the horrible things that we're learning about now, which have done true damage to the sport. So we need a much greater investment of funds to be able to work on lots of different levels. And for me, that's not just more investment in the science side and the testing side. It's also looking more at the intelligence side of it, so that you concentrate those efforts in the right place. And it's making sure that across the board, it is a level playing field. And if you ask Nicole Sapstead about the level of anti-doping controls within the UK, it's very different to that, obviously, in Russia, but also in other countries, in Africa, in other countries in the Middle East. There are lots of areas that need to come up so that there aren't any places where athletes are not subject to the same controls. All athletes should be tested the same number of times and to the same standard before they go to an Olympic Games or World Championships or any major competition.
And a quick final word, this proposal from UK Athletics, or a suggestion to kick off debate about world records being wiped and starting again. Jessie Norman has said it's not absolutely clear what they mean yet, and I'm sure he'll get clarification from Ed Warner today. But what do you think of the suggestion, Paula Radcliffe?
Well, I think if you ask Ed, he will say himself that what they were trying to do was create talking points and to take a proactive step towards restoring confidence and restoring public perception of athletics as a strong and as a clean sport. And I think that I see where they were trying to go. I think moving there with the world records is not something that I would ever back, and is not a point that we're able to be at now, because you're essentially making the clean athlete suffer twice in all of this. I mean, I, for example, know that my world record was achieved cleanly, so that logically means that there are other world records in there that were. Obviously, there are some that there are doubts about as well, but I would rather see us go down the route of trying to prove the ones that you have doubts about, and then when you have proof, wipe the record, but not make the athlete who has already had to compete against cheating athletes in their career suffer twice by then having their world record taken away. And if you reset the records, you're essentially saying that an athlete that competed last year and ran a world record wasn't clean, but if they go out and run the same time this year, then they are.
Yeah.
And
okay.
I don't think we're at that point where we can make those guarantees yet.
Thank you both very much. Jessie Norman, thank you very much for talking directly to Paula Radcliffe. Paula Radcliffe, sorry, do you want to say something else, Mr. Norman?
Well, if you wouldn't mind, yeah, sorry. I'd just like to say how glad I am at the very constructive tone of this conversation, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do, and what I'm sure Paula Radcliffe and other members of the clean-up team at the IAAF are trying to do, is to create a clean sport that everyone can feel trust and confidence in. And so I absolutely welcome many of the things that she said, and I hope she will be supporting many of the things that we come to as conclusions in our committee, because we're all focused on the same goal and the same outcome.
Thank you both very much for your time this morning. Jesse Norman, chairman of the Culture, Media and Sport Committee. His committee is sitting this morning. They'll be questioning the boss of UK Athletics and UK Anti-Doping. Paula Radcliffe, many thanks for your time as well. And you heard for the first time a partial apology from Jesse Norman to Paula Radcliffe, which she accepted.